Also, I want to say a special thanks to Henry Baker and April Swanson for our breakfast and refreshments this morning. Let's give them a round of applause. Also, just a reminder, Sunday school class folders are up here if you haven't grabbed yours. If you'll grab it at some point during the morning and check attendance for your folks that are here, and we'll collect those afterwards. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker this morning. I have not had the privilege of being here the last 2 Sundays, been out of town, but I've heard they've been phenomenal. Dr. Peter Hobbie is a retired professor. He's leading our series this summer during July on world religions, and today he's talking about Judaism. So let's give him a warm welcome.
I love the decorations too. You know, Hindu Hobbie would have been really pleased. These circles, all these circles going around. And I have to give you all an apology from Buddha Hobbie last week. You know where he told you all that if you ever told a half-truth, that you should ask yourself why you did that? Well, he told a half-truth when he said he was going to do, the next guest was Islamic. That's not until next week. This week I'm a Jew, or if you want to call me Hebrew Hobbie, I like it. Who are the Jews? We hear that term a lot, but who exactly are they? They are, originally were nomads with their goats and their herds traveling through the Middle East. When they finally got themselves a nation, it was a postage stamp nation. You know, if you went from southern Israel to northern Israel, it's about the distance between here and Charlotte. And if you traveled east to west, it's about the distance from here to Spartanburg. So it's not a very big territory. And the great nations and the great empires that developed throughout this time period, they didn't even notice the Jews very much. So what was the thing that made them stand out? Why is it today that a large part of our culture in America and in the West has a lot of Jewish heritage to it? What made the difference? And it was their passion for meaning. They always wondered why. Ever had a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old kid? Why? Well, that's kind of how the Jews were in trying to figure out what the meaning of life is. And this is a very important distinction that I wish you had more often. See, I get confused sometimes. I wish you had more often in the Christian faith. What's the difference between knowledge and wisdom? Have you ever thought about that? What's the difference? Knowledge is anybody can pile up facts. They can tell you the distance between the earth to the sun. How many of y'all know that? 93 million miles, right? How far is it to the moon? 240. That's right, good. See? That's right. And they're not very helpful. Just go to Google and click on the thing and you can find it out. No, the difference between facts and knowledge and wisdom is that wisdom seeks meaning. It tries to figure out what the evidence means or what is there. And basically that's what the Jews have always pursued in a way. And so on your outlines this morning you'll see in the heavy print the top meaning of God, meaning of creation. Those are the things I want to look with you about and see what they came up with or what they understood about what life meant. Not so much the facts as what life meant. First off, they searched for a meaning in their understanding of God. Sometimes God can be called the other. There's you, and then there's something out there that's the other. And you know, all people believe in some other out there, don't they? You've had Hindus and Buddhists, and they believe there's something out there for sure because they realize that they don't have power over everything. And if they had power over everything, maybe there wouldn't need to be another. But not only do they realize that they don't have control over everything, they know they didn't create themselves. You know, you had no choice about being born. And honestly, you're probably not going to have much choice about how you die. So there's something, or when. I went and saw my my financial advisor this week, and he said, well, I think you can make it to 88. I said, what? What happens then? So I've got a timeline at least to work for. I guess I better burn the candle at both ends a little bit. So they realized there was another out there, but a lot of people had figured that out, so that's not very distinctive. But gradually they came to understanding of the other that is very, very crucial. First, they decided that whatever is out there is personal. It's not a force. The force be with you, that's a force, and that's a different version. And so when you go to Star Wars, you're seeing a different version of what the other is. It's certainly not Jewish or Christian or Islamic. But both Hinduism and Buddhism have a place for the force, an impersonal controlling force over the world and what the world is. Why did the Jews want a personal God? Some people think it's because Jews always found people a lot more mysterious than nature. Try to figure somebody out. I mean, honestly, I've tried for years, and people always surprise me. Even my best friends will do something that surprises me. And so they kind of saw in God's personality the mysterious, better than they could see it in some force out there driving the world around. So the first thing they did is to see God as personal. And the second thing they did, and this was just as crucial, they never mixed up God and nature. So many religions today, and some versions of Christianity, from what I've studied about your religion, seem to think that you can find God in nature. And the Jews repudiated that. God is over nature. It is beyond, God is in a real effect beyond nature. And this was really a basic contribution that the Jews made to what the world was like. Suppose you believe that God was in nature. What do you think one of the outcomes of that belief would be? If I believe that God is in nature, there's the sun god, and there's a moon god, and there's a weather god, lightning god maybe. You name it, we can just, God's all over the place, right? It's like a bureaucracy. You got to run around all day to try to figure out which god you need to appease today, depending on the weather and what's going on. I don't suggest we make many prayers to the winter god in the middle of the summer. Well, unless you want it to cool off a little bit. And we certainly don't need to make a prayer to the storm god unless we want the rain. And a good example of nature religions and what they do is the very word hurricane. You know where that comes from? It's Huracan, which was the god of storms in the Caribbean Sea. And so you see what happens. If you follow a nature religion, one of the results is most likely to be polytheism, or a belief in more than one God. And so by putting God above nature, the Hebrew people came to the concept there is only one God. Only one God, and that God is a personality. So that was the second basic thing they did. And then the third thing is that they took that God and began to understand that God as not being malicious or mean or cruel or amoral, but they saw that God as a moral God who had certain standards of understanding and belief that were very, very important. Did any of y'all have any dirt on the Greek gods? They just fooled around all the time, didn't they? They cheated on their spouses and had children coming out of their heads and all kinds of weird things. But they had no sense of morality at all. The gods were powerful. They could do what they pleased. And also, the gods didn't seem to care very much about human beings. If you look at the early creation stories that are other than Jewish, And you got to know, when I'm saying Jewish sometimes now, I'm also saying Christian because we have the same background. If you look at some of those stories, human beings were created by the gods to be slaves of the gods. Our job in these religions is to harvest our crops and then sacrifice to the gods so they can come and eat and smell the burning sacrifice. That was their job under nature religions. They were found in the Middle East. But if you determine through your faith that God is not immoral, that God is not trying to take advantage of you, that God is loving and gracious, then you are developing a whole new concept of how God is working. So this whole concept of a personal God and a God that cares about you, and therefore you should care about the world, is a basic understanding of the Jewish faith. Does anybody remember when the teacher came and said to Jesus, see, I've read some of the Jesus stuff too. I know some of it. Said to Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? Don't remember what Jesus said? Did he say, thou shalt not commit adultery? Did he say, thou shalt not steal? What is the greatest commandment?
Love thy neighbor.
Love. Yeah, that's right. It starts off, though, interesting. He said, the Lord our God is Lord alone, one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Now, you picked that up out of another place, but that's okay. You see, he sees, Jesus saw, basically the understanding that the Jews understood through most of their existence. And that is one God who is loving and caring in all that God does. Okay, I'm going to stop and see if y'all want to talk about God. Everybody cool with God? Want to know any Jewish understandings of God that I've left out?
I don't know if this is the time to ask this.
You may ask it any time.
But at what point, as a Christian, it seems that the sacrifice stopped with Jesus, but why did Jews stop sacrificing?
That's a very good question, and it's a historic question. The Jews sacrificed as long as they had a temple. And the temple in Jerusalem remained until about 40 years after Jesus' death and resurrection in your religion. And so in 70 AD, the Romans destroyed the temple. It was never rebuilt. And you know, the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem now is actually one of the outer walls, not the temple, but the outer wall of the temple that was destroyed. And when the temple was lost, most of their energy went into teaching the faith rather than sacrificing. And some of our scholars saw prayer as a new way to sacrifice, which is similar to the Christian view. Does anybody know the word for teacher in Hebrew or Aramaic? Rabbi. See, that's why they don't have priests. There are no Jewish priests anymore. If you go to a temple to worship, you're not going to see a priest. You're going to see a rabbi who's a teacher, because that's where the emphasis is.
So,
A+, thank you.
so if the temple were to be rebuilt, sacrificing would come back.
I don't know.
But you just said it stopped.
It stopped with it, but I can't guarantee that it will start again.
Oh, okay.
I just don't know.
But there are Jews who want that to happen.
That's right. The basic hope is that Jerusalem will one day be united again. And not all Jews look in that direction. What is a Jew who wants the reunification and a great Israel called? No, Hasidic is a type of Judaism. Oh, very good. That's Zionists. The Zionists. And not all Jews are Zionists, so it's varied over the years. Thank you. Any other questions? You can just go off anytime. I'm all right with that. Yes, sir.
So I'm hearing you say your God is totally theistic.
Yes. That's good. How did you learn that one? He said, is my God theistic? I said, yes. And I thought, theistic? That's pretty good. Yes, my religion is very theistic. Thank you. Everybody else with me? Number two, meaning in creation. The real issue for the Jews has never been how the world started or how it works, but what is the meaning behind the creation of the world? Well, Jews believe that the world is good. The world is good because God created the world. A moral, righteous, upstanding God created all there is. So there is a value to life and there's a value to living. Now, if you take away the value to life and the value of living and think it doesn't matter, you're left with some pretty grim choices. You can say, well, the only decision I have to make today, as the existentialists say, is whether I want to continue living or not. Everything else is secondary. And even if you don't decide to do yourself in today, too many people that don't have a sense of the goodness of creation just kind of grind their way through old age and think it's going to be over soon. That's always a temptation for us older people, by the way. So tell us every now and then that we should keep on going because God created a good world and we should want to continue to be part of it. But what about when the roof falls in? What then? What do you do when something goes wrong in life? And the world gave two answers to this question. The stars. The fate is in our stars. When things happen, there's nothing we can do about it. There's nothing that we have any control over. And so we become fatalistic. The Jews never became fatalistic. They believed if something went wrong in life, the problem was not in our stars, but within us. And that's a very, very important point. And by the way, it connects with the other world religions we're talking about. Hindus and Buddhists who have come before me also believe that the problem isn't so much the world, it's how we view the world and how we decide our place in it. Now, the minute you say that perhaps we have responsibility, there's some answers you can give. Well, if we have caused this problem, isn't there something we can do to make it better? If people don't have the health insurance they need, do we just say, well, that's just the way it is? Or do we think of ways that we can improve the healthcare system? And if this giant glacier breaks off from Antarctica, do we say, well, that's just the way nature works? Or do we say, well, maybe we better examine and see if we've had anything to do with that, so maybe we can do something that makes the world better? You see, by saying that we have responsibility, we automatically become more creative because we're looking for ways to change the world and everything in it. And so my people, the Jewish people, never despaired about human life. They thought matter was good. We never were mystics. We liked the world that God gave us and all its material qualities. We liked all the gifts of nature that's been given to us. We like sex because it's part of God's good gift. And so we don't want to ever disparage that. And this too leads to greater creative forces. If you think about it, if there are good things in the world, is the problem that they're not being shared equally enough? That's what the prophet said. The problem isn't that the world is evil and therefore none of this matters. But if there's goodness in the world, doesn't it make sense, as they said, that we should share it with one another? And so all of this led them to the understanding that they have power in the world. People have power in the world. They are God's junior partners, if you like. We're not equal to God. God's the great creator. But there are things we can do in the world that can make a difference in the world. And so we all have roles to play. One other thing, by the way, and this is true of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Because we did not see God in nature, and because nature is important, and we think we can make a difference, we became scientists. Have you ever thought about that? Suppose you thought God existed in every amoeba. Well, I would have to pray for your souls then in 9th grade biology when you put an amoeba in a dish and watched it die. Did you ever have to do that? Have you had to do that yet? It's gruesome. No, because we understood that we can manipulate at some level what is going on around us, that makes science and technology possible. And this is where Christians and Jews owe a special gift to Islam, because Islam saved a large part of the learning that was developed before the fall of the Roman Empire, and eventually passed it back on to us. So because you have this, you look what happens. See, I get excited sometimes. Look what happens if you have this view of the material world. Suddenly you see that God can enter into life. That God can possibly take a human form. What do you Christians call that belief? It's called incarnation. Do you believe that bodies can be raised from the dead? That is resurrection. And so this understanding of the material has always been very important to both the Hebrew faith and the Jewish faith and the Islamic faith. Okay. Stop again real quickly. Everybody okay? Now on your sheet you'll see human existence. You think I've already talked about human existence. But I want to say just a couple more words about it. Because Jews held this view, they really began to hold on to the fact that life was worth living, even though humans had limitations, and even though humans sinned. Now, sometimes even Jews lost sight of this. And if I may say this, one of the worst books in the Hebrew Scriptures, and it's in your Bible too, is in large part, the book of Ecclesiastes. Let me read you one of my favorite passages that just shows you how you can get down on life. This is from chapter 3. I said in my heart with regard to human beings that God is testing them to show that they are but animals. For the fate of humans and the fate of animals is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and humans have no advantage over the animals, for all is vanity. I had a professor once who said, you know what the value of that is? It shows how much the Jewish people needed a Messiah. Because they were so down. And so I don't read that unless I'm in a really cynical mood, and I don't know that you need to read it either. There are a couple of good passages in Ecclesiastes, but generally they held to the view and didn't give up little more than the angels, even though we are sinners. And Jews recognize that. Human beings have a tendency to do the wrong thing. But despite our sin and despite our limitations, they still believe that human beings could carry on, that human beings had responsibility. Now, I know this is a Presbyterian church, and I know a little bit about Presbyterian denominations, so I've got some bad news for you. Jews, and I'll defend what you call the Old Testament, or I call the Hebrew Scriptures on this. The Old Testament is not very clear on any kind of predestination. They basically believe that human beings had the ability, despite their sin and despite their limitations, to make a difference. And so often in the Hebrew Scriptures you'll find statements like, choose this day which you will serve. Choice is still a possibility for them. And I know my friend Christian Hobbie would debate me that that's true for Presbyterians, because he's a Presbyterian, I know that. But I think I can make a case for the fact that there's probably a greater sense of freedom within the Hebrew faith. It's not that they can make a difference, and they recognize, and the Jews I know and that I grew up with all believe that we've got a loving parent God who is trying to direct us in that direction of doing what is right. Yes?
So do the Jews believe that they are God's chosen people?
Oh, yes.
Well, is that not predestination?
Well, that's what...
Don't try to argue with it.
Congratulations. No, and they don't understand it. They find out what they do not. Maybe it's more on a sense that as you live life, you can't depend on this having been chosen for you. And Christian Hobbie would say the same thing. Christian Hobbie, and I hate to speak for him, but I will. Christian Hobbie says, yes, I believe in predestination because I did not choose when I was born. And I do not decide my own salvation. God saved me. That's what I would say as a Christian. So I don't go around wondering whether I'm saved or not. And I will be so bold to say that I think all of you all are saved. And whether God judges some people, I have no idea. It's none of my business. And I'm playing God the minute I start passing judgment on other people. But I do think at the same time that between my birth and my ultimate salvation, God gives me free rein. I don't think God predestined me to come to Anderson this morning, unless I run off the road and die. maybe that will be part of it. But I think we've got a great freedom of choice in how we get from point A, birth, to point B, death. And so there's freedom in between. My life has been all over the map. And so, in a way, you can have your cake and eat it too. Just don't push it too hard, because it's very difficult. It's just a tension. It's always there. You're good. I'm not. You should major in religion. Did you? I'm mistaken. Yes.
How do the Jews reconcile all the terrible things that happened to them through history if they think of God as a very loving and caring?
Right. That is a wonderful question. That's a great question.
Would you repeat it?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Had the Jews reconciled themselves to all the terrible things that happened to them if they believe in a loving and caring God? Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that deals, thank you for my segue, with their view of history. Like no other religion, except Islam to some extent, but certainly Christianity and my own religion of Judaism, we understand that God is not found in nature. I've made that point. But the way we know God is in history and everything that has happened to us. We believe in a God of history, a God that acts in human history. That's how my people found God in the first place. How did they find God in the first place? There were a bunch of slaves in Egypt, and Moses came and said, you know, I am representing your God, let's get the heck out of here. But that's when they first learned about God, basically, and then they went back and wrote all the stories that came before that, looking back in hindsight to see how the world started. But the nucleus of the Jewish faith lies in history, in the Exodus. And so we have an important way of understanding God, and that's in the events that happen. And so that has increased our understanding of how God works in the context, I hope that's not too complicated, context of the world as we find it. Each generation has got to face the problems of their country and their culture in the ways that have been revealed within that context. You've got to realize that 150 years ago, the big problem about the automobile is, what do we want to do with all the horses? I mean, we had a whole different set of problems. Some people say, well, we can never have big cities because where would we put the horses? And so we recognize that context matters in everything that happens. But we also have the ability, and this is where it shows up in history, of collective action. The Jewish people are a community. and they function as a community. What they do is a community action. Where did they discover God in Scripture shows itself in the crossing of the Red Sea. That wasn't one person, it wasn't two people, it was the whole nation went through the waters and came out, a nation. And so this idea that history shows us how we can perform God's work in the world. God uses history as a measure and means of moving us. So history isn't evil. It's a great field of opportunity. If you just take advantage of it, you can go out there and you can really make a difference. We are the first religion to really understand this, that history is important. Hindus didn't get that. Buddhists didn't get that. So I'm here to tell you something that's new. And that is, it matters. It makes a difference. Because God is looking down upon His own, as the old hymn used to say, looking down on us, seeing how we're going to do this and how we're going to help make the world a better place. Now I'm going to go back and attack nature religion one more time as a Jew. Okay, I don't mean to offend, to hurt the feelings of any tree huggers in here, or any extreme environmentalists. I'm certainly an environmentalist myself. But the problem of finding God in nature is you never want to change anything. Nature is perfect as it is. And so we don't think about the possibility that God can have any concern over any of the rest of the world. And so it is quite, I think, legitimate to say the Jewish people, through their religion, discovered the groundwork for social change. It recognized that there was always an opportunity for a human community to work. Now, what was that human community supposed to be like? Well, this is the morality of the Jewish nation. You know how many laws there are in Judaism? 613. I counted each one now. Somebody else counted them for me, because I've never even read them all. And most Jews would say that some of them don't count anymore. You don't have to do some of the things that the law says anymore. They really label it down, of course. Probably the easiest way to see the moral code that should lead a community is in the Ten Commandments. And I want to talk about morality a little bit and what the Ten Commandments mean in that regard. There are probably 4 danger areas in human communities. And those are the dangers of using force, of wealth, sex is dangerous, and what you say matters. Those are the 4 areas. Animals don't have a problem with any of these. I mean, I guess a squirrel could be very proud of how many nuts it collected. I don't think so. Animals don't even have a problem with that sex, because they don't have sex 12 months a year. Human beings are cut loose with all this sexual passion, and you know, those rams get together and butt heads for what, maybe 3 weeks, and it's over. So sex isn't really a problem, and speech is no problem, unless you believe in Francis the Talking Mule. But human beings have trouble with each one of these. And so the Ten Commandments set a minimal standard of the kind of morality you need to have to be an effective community. The community is the center of what we understand. You know that if you have sex and murder, you're going to have blood feuds. And so it's okay. The Ten Commandments say you can bicker and you can argue and you can do everything you want to, but you cannot inflict murder or harm, physical harm, on another person. That's a minimum standard, it seems to me. And the same thing is true about sex. The Ten Commandments don't say you can't be flirtatious. The Ten Commandments don't even say that you can't be promiscuous. What the Ten Commandments says is that there's one thing that you cannot do because it can destroy society, and that is break the covenant of marriage. When you marry a person, that covenant is important for upholding the community. And so when we say in the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not commit adultery, it means at a minimum sexual indulgence with a married person that you didn't marry. And possessions, you can make your pile as big as you want to. But there is a minimum standard, and that is you cannot take what doesn't belong to you. You cannot go pilfer somebody else's pile. You can undercut them, you can do all kinds of mean tricks, but you cannot take from them what is not yours. And finally, you can fib if you want to. I know the Buddhist guy said, watch out for your half-truth. You can fib, you can even lie. But there's one thing you cannot do, and that is, before a court, you cannot lie under oath. That is because, and what I need for you to see is all of these were to build up community strength. Now, I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. In some respects, Judaism is closer to African American churches in this regard. If you are an underdog for so long, as the Jews were and as African Americans are, you know what really becomes important to you? Your community. And so in the African American church and in Judaism, the main emphasis is, do you uphold the community? It doesn't worry as much about what your own personal morality is. It does your own personal morality get in the way of the community. And so I think that's a valuable lesson that might be helpful to us. Now, this idea of social change was really based in the prophets who came along later. Y'all know the prophets, don't you? I had a friend whose father wrote a book on the minor prophets. And a friend said, is this an economics book? Minor prophets are not about a business that isn't doing very well. But the prophets all spoke truth to power. And you know the great story of Nathan and David and Bathsheba. And you know the story of Elijah and Naboth's field and how the king stole it away from him. And that's risky business to go tell the king, this won't do with God. And so they made a mark. But then the next generation of prophets, like Amos and Hosea, struck a different note. It's not just power out there. It's not just our leaders. It is what we do as a community. What are we doing as a community that is wrong? What are we doing to deny what the basic needs for what the Bible called the orphan, the widow, the alien in your midst? When we fail in those ways, ultimately, what happens to us? Now, maybe you never thought of this. I said a minute ago, that, and I sincerely believe this as a Jew, God does not punish you in this lifetime for some sin. Like if you go out tomorrow and get robbed, you don't have to sit around and say, well, what did I do to deserve this? That's not part of the Christian faith. And it's not part of the Jewish faith either. God doesn't do that to people. But I wonder about nations. I don't know any nations that are going to have eternal life. Do you? I know some of us, and maybe all of us kind of secretly, think maybe the United States will be eternal. It won't be. And so how does God pass judgment on nations? God has to pass judgment in this life, in the life of the nation. So I think we can see in what happens in the community a sign of God's action to kick us a little bit in the butt and get us moving when we're not doing the right thing. Now, your judgment will await another day. That's true in my faith, Jewish faith, and in yours. But we need to be aware that God has standards. And God expects us as a community of people to do something about what is going on around us. Any other questions on that?
Did you actually answer Penny's question?
Now listen to this. I'm optimistic. not going to break it. I think I did. What was the question?
About how do the Jewish people justify that
Oh, I'm
they
coming to
suffered
that.
so much?
Yeah.
Okay,
I'm coming to that.
okay. All right,
see
well,
that-
she's gone, but I was gonna tell her.
Oh, well, tell her.
I was gonna tell her.
I hate for her to be gone. Go right there to the choir. Is that what she is? Okay. The Jewish people see their role in history as being the suffering servant. Now, you Christians have taken the suffering servant and the concept of Messiah and combined them in Jesus. My faith obviously doesn't do that. The Messiah for Jews has yet to come. And we understand the Messiah is going to be a great leader. And Jesus didn't fulfill that. So we still await the great leader coming. Some Jews do, some have kind of given up on it. But we do clearly understand that we have suffered for the world. We are suffering servants of the world. God has given us the special task of bearing the burdens of others. And if you go back and read the Isaiah passages on the suffering servant, you will see this. That somehow there is a value in what, to use a fancy term, vicarious suffering can do. Martin Luther King once said, when you innocent suffering, in other words, suffering for something you did not do, is redemptive. In other words, it brings blessings on other people. And so the Jews have tried to understand their role in the world as being this role of redemptive suffering. Suffering does happen in the world, and sometimes we bring it upon ourselves. But there are times when you will suffer for something that you did not do, or for doing something that shouldn't cause suffering. Being shunned by people because you take a certain stand on an issue, that's suffering. It's hard to be lonely. And so you do these things with the understanding there's a meaning and purpose behind them within history and even beyond history. Can you tell her that? Try not to tear it down too much. Tell her. Well, how did the Jews figure all this out? I told you a lot today about what the Jews believe, but how did they figure it out? Let me tell you what a Jew would say. Beats me. They know that they didn't think it up. They believe something that is clear in the, not in Oriental religions, but certainly in the Middle Eastern religions, and that is God's revelation. God chose this group of wandering nomad nobodies to be God's spokesman for God's love, justice, and mercy. And my poor people have not always done a good job of living up to that. But we don't think we figured it out on our own. And we don't stand around saying, isn't it wonderful how the Jews worked all of this out? But like your faith is a faith of revelation, so is mine. And so through experiences that we have had as a people throughout the centuries, we have learned to know God because God chose us to know. God chose us. We are predestined to be God's people. Now listen carefully at this, because this is very important. That's not necessarily a gift, you know. To be chosen by God is to be chosen to suffer, to struggle, to sense God's presence in your life, which is the most wonderful thing in the world. But it's a task as much as it is a joy. And that's the task of the Jewish people. And I've gone exactly 90 seconds longer than I should have, but let me see if you all